Hey there, One Up Indie here, coming with the third devlog of Super Demon Survivors, and today hopefully I can once again entice you to join me on this journey of game development and what kind of ideas and things and concepts are basically happening in the background, which are super fundamental and you take for granted. But if you make a video game and you're a beginner, maybe you're thinking like, I'm not sure about that kind of stuff, and therefore, well, this is what this whole thing is for. So what you're seeing in front of you is basically the game running, which is totally fine, and then let's say you get a level up, and then what you're seeing basically in front of you is called a GUI, a graphical user interface, which is allowing you graphically to interact with the game and kind of control it. For example, if you would have no control, then well, everything would be a movie, and then this is not a game because there is no interaction, you just watch. So basically you can watch it from your couch or whatever. But this graphical user interface has a few things, and then you need to understand that you want to control the program. Of course, there is the UI, which is called the just user interface, and graphical one is a subset of it. But for example, the UI is, for example, a text or just a mask where you just can type in some stuff and then you control a machine or whatever. These things already exist. Also, they're a little bit more, let's call it not primitive, but they are more functional. Here, this is then made a little bit more nicer with buttons, icons, sliders, and of course information being shown on the screen. So if we just use this knowledge here, what is the first impression which you're getting if you see that stuff? First of all, it just says, hey, level up. That means you are getting something out of it. Then you see those choices, and for example, if you hover over with your mouse for experimental reasons, then you see, okay, they kind of change when you're hovering over. That means they are interactable. And then, for example, if you press on one of them, then you can pick one of three choices. And this is a thing which we have been trained on. So this is now feeling for us natural. But let's say 30-40 years ago, that wasn't. So once again, we are taking all these things because we did it 1,000 times already with our phones or computers for granted. This is one very, very important aspect to understand. Of course, there's a little anecdote which I'm going to say at the very end, so stick with me to this one. But the next thing, if you are making your game, is to indicate core informations which are super important. So here a small information is, for example, it just says a little skull and then it has a number, and then you can just say, okay, this could be a counter how many of the instances of the enemies we already flattened. And then, for example, another thing is you have a red health orb. And then why do I say health? Instantly, because we associate the red color with life, and therefore we just say, okay, this is a representation of the health of the enemy, of the player which we are controlling. And of course, if we get hit in a few seconds, then boom, it just indicates us, hey, this is bad because we want to stay healthy. Very, very important thing. So for example, a color which would be green or blue would not indicate life, but let's say mana, because these things has already been standardized. And for example, green would be a stamina, or for example, yellowish could be most of the time for experience. So here once again, a lot of things are already standardized even before we passively or actively actually acknowledge them. So let's, I don't know, pick one of those, and then as you can see, now we have added to one of those empty slots one of our abilities. And here this is once again indicating through the GUI, telling us, hey, we have gotten some extra stuff. And for example, now we can pick up, and then for example you see a number, and then of course through text, if we read it, most of the time people don't read it, they just click on one of those things, then it just says, okay, /0, so damage 9 to 12, and boom, if you click on it, it just says 9. So let's check it out, 9 to 12. Yep, 12 as a result of damage. So as you can see, now it's 13 to 16, and here this is then the part of the number crunching. So for people who want to maximize early builds, late builds, this is then for people who invest heavily into the game. But for example, for most people, they just say casually, hey, I like the way this goes, or I like the way that goes, and then they just pick, mix and match. So here once again you give the player the control of how they want to play the game and what they want to pick, and then in the end everybody is well being suited, because in the end it's important that the game is fun, and some want to optimize it to the very core, and some just want to play and get the experience of it. And then once again the user interface, or here rather the graphical user interface, is giving you tons of indication and information. And as you can see here, by picking up those orbs or those little gems here, we have a bar which is going up, and then once it's filled we get our next level up. So here once again we are creating instantly from the get-go a loop which is kind of easy. You're just getting rewarded for, well, killing those enemies and collecting those things to get new upgrades. Very easy to understand concept, and therefore I can understand why this whole game type is kind of addictive. And as you can see, just without doing too much, we already eradicated 500 instances just by doing not too much. Alright, so this is basically the graphical user interface, once again giving you and the player an indication what's happening and giving feedback, which is super important to do. And before I just start off with the last anecdotes concerning user interfaces and how we are conditioned to do that, well, another thing which I wanted to mention is you need to take a lot of information, not just for the player, but of course for the developer. So for here we just say, hey, we got 1300 instances on the screen, and how well is my overall performance. And for example here we wanted to do a few extra things and give all those instances a step event, which was a terrible idea. I just checked it out. So for well, so they can go around obstacles, which kind of worked, but at 1000 instances the frame rate was very low, so I don't know, 60 or something. And therefore I said like maybe let's not do that, because you have to imagine every step, so basically 60 times per second times 1000 instances. This is just a crazy amount of calculations which are being done here, and therefore the enemies need to be ultra bare bones. So how do they look like? Well, kind of easy. So let's go into our enemy just quickly to see what's actually going on. He just have one create event, which is just storing a few variables in there. So basically how much damage you're dealing, how fast he's going, and how much HP he has, and then some extra stuff. And boom, this is basically our enemy. And then the variation is in the end just a sprite swap, an optical illusion for the player. So here once again this is then the thing for the game. And let's go to the last part, which I already promised. So I guess that was an article which I read that was super interesting, that there was a child, I don't know, 3 years, 4 years or whatever, and then it went to the aquarium, and because it was used to having those well, windows that you can swipe on them, it tried to make the fish bigger by kind of scrolling the glass. So as you can see, because a child maybe doesn't understand that this thing is not a screen, that's actually a real life, just not mirror but a glass, which is just separating it. And therefore, as you can see, these things can be trained for people, and we do that every day nowadays. And the generations, the last few generations have been just been taught this, and therefore it feels natural to us. But in the end, it is not. So all these buttons and mouse clicks and user interfaces, all that stuff is artificial information, but our brain is separating that. For example, here it's just separating for us, hey, this is important, it's coming up, here you can interact, and this will give you that effect. And of course, if you want to go a little bit further, then you got some extra text which is being highlighted by a different color, maybe a different size, a different icon, and then you can distinguish and quickly say like, hey, I want this, I want that, and then you can go quickly and play the game. And of course, on the other side, as a developer, you need to have some extra informations which are hidden from the player, but you need to check them for, I don't know, for some extra shenanigans, or for some performance boost, or for example, triggering some extra events and so on, which things which just feel natural for the player, but for us developers, we need to once again think ahead and say like, okay, we need to tweak these values, we need to display those numbers just to say like, okay, what's happening and what is giving an optimal or a better approach to making the game better in the end. So here, diagnostic information. So hopefully you enjoyed this, really lengthy rant, and see you in the next one. Have a good one. One up indie.